welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Anna. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. So can you tell me about your family structure, your siblings, disabilities, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, so as you said, my name's Anna. I am in a family. We have my parents have 3 kids. I'm the middle child, which is just a whole thing. My older sister, her name's Maddie. She's 18. She has Rett syndrome. And then I have a younger brother named Luke, who is 10. We're military. We're currently in Colorado. But a little bit about my sister real quick. So she has Rett syndrome, which is a neurological disorder, which causes her not to be able to use her hands, talk. She can't walk. And it's a external processing disorder. So internally, she's thinking the same as we are. She's having the same communications, but her brain can't communicate with the rest of her body.
Oh,
And
okay.
so mentally, she's the same as us, and she knows what we're saying. She just can't express it, which really sucks because a lot of people baby talk to her and stuff like that. Girl, come on. He's older than you. Stop doing that. That's just embarrassing. So yeah, it's really unique though, being a special needs military family, because that's such a weird subset that you don't hear a lot. And so it's interesting how the military changes when you are a family with someone with special needs, what we can and can't do. We can't go overseas, which is a unique experience. Because what do you think military families? You're oh yeah, that kid's probably lived in a bunch of different places. But we can only move so many different places because of my sister's medical conditions, which is
Oh, interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
And is
Um,
that more due to her specific medical conditions, or is it any family that has anyone that with special needs can't go to another limited number of places? You know what I mean?
so it depends case by case basis. My sister has to receive a bunch of different therapies, a bunch of different specialties that they just don't have in rural UK. Just don't have those same things. So if your sibling is more typical and needs a few less things, maybe just speech therapy or something, then you do have that opportunity to move more places, but it just really depends. There's actually a whole office called Exceptional Family Member Programs,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of decide where you can go with what you need. So it's
Okay.
they take charge of that because they realize that was an issue, and so they have a whole office devoted to that and respite care that the military provides. That's pretty cool. Go military.
Yes. That's really nice though that they have just dedicated people to help you figure it out, because I'm sure it's already complex enough just with your regular typical members of your family, and then you're just adding and compounding extra stuff on top of that.
For sure. And then we go in between insurances because my sister has state provided special needs insurance, but we also all military members receive TRICARE for them and their families. So trying to figure out what covers what and what forms we need to get on, all that kind of thing. So it's really cool they do have a special set of people. And they're pretty accessible for the most part to go talk to.
Yeah, that's really helpful because it's yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think those two things separated is already complicated enough, right? You have regular families who aren't part of the military who just can't figure stuff out, and not because they can't. It's just because it's complex. Just because unless if you're in networks of families that already they're in OT and PT, all these things, you just don't know until you then search the internet and then all of these things. But getting having the local support is kind of an interesting thing, just because the internet is great, and I think there's a lot of ways we got connected that way, right? Just through the internet. But it's interesting for if I was looking for other people, if I was when I was younger, people that were my age in my hometown, that was much more complicated to be able to find support groups that are in your local community that you could drive to and all of that. Yeah.
So it's and, like, I was actually able to start a sibling support group with, like, our local EFMP program.
Oh, so
So that
fun.
was cool with siblings. A lot of them are definitely on the younger side, which I was very surprised with, but at the same time, though, free babysitting, like, I get it.
Yeah.
It was cool, though. We got chit chat with some siblings. It ran for about 6 months, and then people got busy with school and stuff, which is completely
Yes.
understandable.
Yeah.
But we, like, did stress relief activities, we did all sorts of cool stuff. And now we're, like, starting to pick it back up again because we had a little break, but now we're getting rolling again, which is good. So hopefully something will happen over winter break. But yeah, it's really cool because the military actually paid for my support group to happen. We were able to get a waiver for it, so the military paid for it, so I didn't have to pay for anything out of pocket. Go Air Force, thank you, appreciate
Yeah.
it. So yeah, they definitely it's cool how many resources the military has and, like, families can receive respite care for free through the military too, so, like, free babysitting, with people who can handle children with special needs, which is really hard to find.
Yeah.
There's definitely some bonuses.
For your sister, did you, since you're younger than her, did she always like have her disability to the level that it's at like when you were born and growing up with it, or is it like when you got older then it kind of like kicked in later?
So she was fine up until she was 2, which was at when I was born. We're 2 years apart. But the thing about Rett syndrome, it presents, like, as a typical, like, child until you reach, like, a certain age when this one gene is supposed to kick in and, like, do whatever it's supposed to do. I think it's some type of protein. But in Rett syndrome, it just forgets to kick in or you don't have it. And so she was fine up until she was 2. She was, like, talking, walking, like, just, like, being a toddler, and then it starts regressing, and she wasn't able to say mom anymore. She wasn't able to talk, which is so scary, like, that's I wasn't old enough to, like, know what's going on because I was, like, a baby, but I just can't imagine how scary that would be for my parents for, like, over time, like, over I think it was, like, over a course of 6 months to a year, they were like, this is happening," and, like, everyone was, like, just playing it off like, "Oh, no, she's just going through a phase," that kinda thing, and my parents were like, "No,
Right.
something about this isn't right." And so they tried to say like a bunch of different things, like maybe she's on the spectrum or maybe she has like Down syndrome or something. My parents were like, "Yeah, but the typical presentation though, up until an age and then the regression, that doesn't sound right." Because both my parents are nurses. And so they were like trying to research and then she got gene therapy tested and they found out that it was Rett syndrome. And this was like in 2005. And so there wasn't a lot of information about Rett syndrome out yet, and what they did find was really morbid and sad, and my parents were like, "Oh, okay, well, this is" so that was it great, and then I was just born until the doctor's like, "Oh my gosh, you just had another child, you need to test her, like, right now. It runs in families," which is not true. Rett syndrome is not hereditary, but at that time, because we didn't have as much research as we did now, they didn't know, so they thought maybe because it has been in cousins before, like,
Yeah.
cousins had but I think that was just, like, random, like, crazy.
Yeah, because there's only so much like, oh, you know, like some distant relative and all these things. Like it's bound to happen on some level, but like,
So they, like, freaked out my parents. They're like, "Oh my gosh, like, your other daughter probably has it, like, you need to get her tested." So I got gene therapy tested at, like, 3 months old. I don't have it, and I'm like, "You can't be a carrier for it because it is, like, a random mutation." But Maddie, she's actually on a drug trial right now, and it just finished, and now it's, like, open label, so I can talk about it, called, Debut, and it's the first drug ever meant to treat Rett syndrome, and it's super cool, and it
interesting.
yeah, she's
Okay.
been on the drug trial for the past, oh, I wanna say 7 years, but we never knew if she was on the drug or not because it's a drug trial, but I think she was because she was making crazy, leaps. Like, she said "mom" for the first time. We went out to a restaurant, she grabbed a fry. Like, she hadn't done that in years.
Oh, yeah. So you can tell, like, just from like her irregular behaviors, like, wait, like something.
Yeah, it was so cool to see because she, like, started she was a lot more, like, social and wanted to, like, go hang out and, like, that kind of thing. So I'm really fortunate that Debut has been approved by the FDA. It finally got approved,
Yeah.
and so now, like, we'll receive it for, like, the foreseeable future.
It's that's so interesting. That's so cool. So is that something where she's like just gonna have to take that forever, or is
Yeah.
it just like okay, okay,
But the thing about it is because it is, like, the only drug and it's super experimental and, like, pretty groundbreaking, it is insanely expensive. I don't know exactly how much it is, but for her she takes 2 doses a day, And, like, we did the math, and it would be, like, around $50,000 a month if we didn't have insurance,
Oh my gosh.
which is just insane, and so I'm just really thankful, like, the military takes care of us with insurance and then the state. I'm just so blessed that, like, we didn't have to make her stop taking this amazing drug because of insurance. So my sister, she's, like, really cool. And she actually went and spoke to legislators in Washington, D.C. over the summer about continued
Really?
funding for, experimental drugs through state, insurance.
Yeah.
And so she gotta go talk to congressmen and women emphasizing that, like, we need to pay for these drugs for kiddos because if the state doesn't, who is? And so that's actually really cool. She got to, like, meet a bunch of amazing people. She's just, like, such a girl boss out in DC.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, right? Because it's kind of like to be able to get to that point that she needed the drug to be able to get to that point, but then it's also just like it's like the whole like living proof thing, right?
Yeah.
Because clearly like it works, like because she's there standing like in front of
No,
you,
it's
like
so cool.
yeah,
And I think it was really cool for, like, this congressmen and women and these, House of Representative people, I don't know what they're called, representatives, I guess, to see, like, the things they're doing are directly affecting people and their families, and so they kinda gotta see, like, Maddie is being, benefited by this drug, and so maybe, yeah, we should probably continue paying for this, like, it's so cool.
it's crazy like how much just like technology and research development has occurred in the last like even more than 10 years, but even like if we just look at only like the past decade, it's like it's crazy, right? The amount of like resources and engineering and just like in science that there is to help support like a variety of things, like I feel like it changes so much of like when you get a diagnosis, because even like as like, and it's interesting, right? Because it's like because my sister would have gotten diagnosed in like the very late 90s, and so what's interesting about that is like the amount that my parents could tell me was like limited because they only knew so much, and then doctors only knew so much, and then there was only so much science even at that time, right? But now like even when you got old enough for your parents to talk to you about your sister, right? Like they just the level of information, even though that they didn't have a lot for that specific disability, but just the amount of information that existed, even as less as it was, is still more than not having the science and it's so interesting how that.
I'm so glad, like, we were talking about earlier, like, the internet connection and, like, that because now, we're knowing people who are getting diagnosed, and they're able to, like, jump on Facebook, talk to actual families, like, "Hey, what's it actually like?" Being able to watch people on YouTube living full, fulfilling lives with these disorders and knowing, like, "Hey, there is, like, hope, and this isn't just, like, a terrible, terrible thing we're gonna have to suffer with, like, everything will work out." And then you're talking about, like, the scientific advancements, Rett syndrome, kiddos are actually in their first, like, gene therapy trials, and so there's 2 kids, one here in the US and then one in Canada, who are the first gene therapy patients, and they're being treated, like, for the Rett syndrome mutation, and both of them have had no, like, negative side effects, they're doing really good, they're having, like, being able to, like, sit unassisted and stuff like that. So, like, this is brand new, this is, like, 2 years ago they first released this. And so it's kind of crazy how quickly, like, things are happening, like this gene therapy, which it sounds kinda terrifying, honestly.
Do you know how that works? I don't even know like
So, from
how.
what I understand, and I might be wrong on this, but they first give the girls chemo to knock out their immune system so that they don't fight their own antibodies and, like, the things they're giving, and then they'll receive, after they don't have, like, an immune system, they'll receive, like, these injections with, like, the edited cells, I guess, and hopefully they'll reproduce and start taking over for, like, the mutated cells.
Yes.
From what I understand, I don't really know more about it because I haven't really looked.
Oh, that's fine. I was just curious. I mean, I know zero. So, like, even if the premise of what you're saying is correct, and obviously people should go do their own
Yeah, for
research.
sure. I am
Like,
not a doctor.
yeah,
I am not a gene editor specialist. This is just from what I know from, like, TikTok and YouTube. So take that with what you will. Um, yeah, but it sounds super scary though. Like, I can't imagine, like, getting chemotherapy and then, being administered, like, experimental treatment. So, like, I just so, like, I don't know, proud or just thankful, I guess, of those 2 girls who did volunteer. Like, that is just so amazing of them. Like, I don't know, they're anonymous, but if I could thank them, I would.
It's so crazy because it's like, yeah, there's so many things in general that are, and I think they're really exciting for kind of people that are like right now, like either like yourself, like becoming adults, or like other people I've talked to on the podcast who are like more like full fledged adults. It's so interesting, right? Because it's like we all grew up in a time, even though they're like different from each other, for the most part, like there was like a lack of knowledge and understanding and education is a general statement across the board for like all parents and all kiddos, right? But yeah, now as we go into this whole new world where like we all can talk about like our own personal experiences and like this is what happens if you like, you know, when these things happen like to our siblings, and to be able just to even have that, and then you have all this other science and research that's being done at like, and I think more on a massive scale than even before, right? Just because with computers you can like, there's people who are in the US who can like share their like research with other people who aren't here, and that like changes the game so much, just because like that changes, yeah, that just changes it for everybody to be able to have access to just the knowledge, even if they don't have like the money to be able to like spend on certain things, but it's just like the education and knowledge of like, okay, like we're not going to die.
Yeah, for sure, that's such a good point.
So that did you always live where you currently live, or have you had to move a couple of times?
So we've moved 4 times, I wanna say. We were born Me and Maddie were both born in Louisiana, which is where our parents were born. Because my dad's he's in the reserves, which is like the Air Force, but he's in, like, the reserve unit, but he's full-time. So he's, like, considered active duty, but he's in the Air Force Reserve. It's a whole thing. But, he was born and raised in Texas. My mom was born in Louisiana. They met in Louisiana, and then they had me and Maddie. My dad joined the Air Force there, and then we moved to Oklahoma when I was 4, 2 or 4, 3 or 4. I think maybe 4. I think 4. And then we lived in Oklahoma till I was in 1st grade, to like 6 or 7, and then we moved to here, and Colorado's definitely been the best. Colorado has so many resources, and, like, the hospitals here and, like, specialists are just top notch, and so that's been really cool. Cause like, Oklahoma and Louisiana are definitely more rural than where we live in Colorado, and so that was, like, a big struggle. Like, we would have to drive, like, 2 hours to Oklahoma City.
Oh man. Oh, just to like get to like a
Yeah,
doctor or
or, like,
something.
have an ultrasound or, like, a quick blood draw, because like, they weren't able to do it where we were at, and so that was just, like, a huge burden. So it's really nice now we have a children's hospital in our city and, like, a bigger one, like, 45 minutes away. So that's really cool to have it so localized and, like, really in the community and not have to drive to, like, 2 hours away to get anything done.
I'm sure you're also just around, you're just closer to other people in general. Not to say that you weren't in those other places, but it's just like, yeah, when you're more closer in proximity to a city, just it provides you like
Oh,
with
for sure.
a whole set of like more things.
And now she can, like, her wheelchair, like, people and, like, the AFOs, all that thing, they're all here and not, like, spread out everywhere. We have to go to, like, 6 different cities to get everything done. Now it's all at home, which is great.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. So then the group that you were talking about that you got to restart again, so that's all local to where you
Yeah.
are.
Yep, so that's through my local Air Force base, and, like, their EFMP office, and so that was really cool to get to interact with people who are, like, in my area with siblings with special needs, like, such a niche group, so that was really cool to talk to, and it was interesting, the parents were really curious, like, how they could help their kids, because like, we always talk about, like, "Oh, the sibling with special needs, how can we help them?" Like, that kinda thing, but, like, we don't get talked about at all, so it's cool hearing from parents, like, "How can I help my child?" Like, "What do you wish your parents would have done to benefit you, when you were, like, in elementary school?" And so that was really cool to get to, like, talk about, and hopefully some of the stuff I said helped.
Yeah, no, I think the first time that I really had that conversation with someone, I was probably like 20. When I really put together like, oh, like my parents, like, yeah, like I recognize like how I grew up, and I recognize stuff that like, oh, it would be better if they did this, or it would be helpful, not better necessarily, but I think it would be helpful for me just to grow up, right? And so yeah, I remember talking to a mom, yeah, when I was like 20 or something, and it was interesting because it's not so much that she asked me, but more that like I told her like, oh hey, like one of the things I said was like, it would have helped me a lot if I had spent more time with my mom growing up, because the way that I grew up was like, because it's just me and my sister, so how they did it was like division of labor, kind of like I hung out with my dad a lot, and then my mom hung out with my sister a lot, and kind of just we just went kind of our separate ways a little bit, which like it worked. But then I'm obviously much closer with my dad than with my mom due to that, right? Because that when you're spending a lot of more your like developmental age, just like going to school and doing homework and like with your friends, and I'm just talking to my dad like all the time, and my mom's just with my sister like in therapy in the car, like driving, like all these things, right? And so I remember when I was talking to her about it, and it's her son at that time I think was like 13 or something like that. So it's been interesting where I got for a couple of years I got to like see them once a year, and it was so interesting how like it evolved in like such a good way for them to be able to like yeah, like they talk and it's like they're close and yeah, it was
Oh,
cool.
that's so cool. Yeah, I agree, like, with the parents, like, attention thing. Like, there's definitely times where I was like, "Okay, like, what about me?" Like, not trying to be, like, self-centered, but also I'm here too.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely an interesting balance. I think my parents did a pretty good job of, like, evening out, like, time, like, in between them. But, like, at the same time, though, my mom's always helping my sister if I need her to, like, help me, like, flat iron the back of my hair. Like, I have to, like, wait until she finishes getting Maddie in bed and settled and connected to feeding tubes and, like, all that kind of thing. Where, like, for some of my friends' moms, it's just like, "Hey, mom, can you come help me with that, this?" And she's like, "Yeah." Like, "Give me, like, a minute." And she'll, like, walk upstairs. But it's not like that with my family. I don't know if it's like that with yours, but it's definitely, like
No,
there's definitely, like, a tension order, and I'm, like, towards this part.
priority, yeah, prioritization of children and needs is like I am very much on the bottom
Oh,
of
yeah,
that
for
list. Like
sure.
it's
Which,
not.
like, it makes sense, like, my hair probably isn't as important as my sister being fed, but, like, when you're little, you don't think of it like that, and you're like, "Oh, my mom just doesn't like me." But now, like, growing up, I'm like, "Oh, no, she just is doing what needs to be done."
It is such like a hard, yeah, like when you look, yeah, like when in real time when you feel it, like it's very much like why don't my parents like care about me, right? Because that's really what it feels like. Like as much as we it does or doesn't feel like that when you look back on it as like 10 years later, like
In
it
the moment,
really
though,
is
that's what it
like
feels like, "Oh, do I just, like, not matter or what?"
yeah, right. And it's like I can just kind of scream as loud as I want, and they still like, oh, why are they? They're still not coming. Oh, okay, I guess like they don't hear me, and it's like, yeah, it very much feels like you just kind of like if I didn't exist, it would be the same,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like if I was just like was invisible, then it wouldn't matter. Yeah, that part of it is not fun,
No.
especially, and I think like it's interesting, right? Because in like your home that's one thing, right? Because your sibling is there and your parents are like they're like dealing with it in real time, and it's interesting how that can foster itself like in your social life, like in school or like when you interact with other families or whatever, right? To be able to like so how it fostered for me is like when I went to school and stuff, it like stayed with me. I was like, oh, like people aren't gonna care like what I think, or like, oh, people don't care what my favorite color. Like
Yeah.
I like internalized it. So I don't know if you did that too or a different thing.
I'm definitely super extroverted, and so I like if people aren't listening, I'll make them listen. And so
Ah, okay,
I'm
okay.
definitely lucky there. I That's actually been so helpful though, like talking to people because I am like I'll say what I'm thinking, which is good and bad, but that's definitely been helpful. But it definitely affects my social life, I think, especially before I could drive. Like now, not as much, but beforehand, like and my friends were like, "Hey, let's go do this tonight." I'm like, "Oh, I actually can't. I have my sister has therapies and my mom can't drive me because someone has to be home with my sister." Like that kind of thing, you know?
Oh, right, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, it's just been, like, interesting seeing how that's transitioned since I started driving. Like, I, like, was such a homebody, didn't go anywhere, not because I didn't want to, but because there wasn't any way for me to.
Yeah, you literally can't like.
To, like, now when I've been driving and, like, I have, like, friends that don't just go to my school that I met, like, line dancing and, at a college class I'm taking at night now, like, stuff like that. It's really been cool to see how it's, like, transitioned.
Yeah, it was funny because like my parents when I got my license, it was this thing where they were like, here, just drive yourself to all these things, because and it wasn't so much that it was social. It was just I had a lot of school activity stuff, so I was just like at school back and forth a lot of time, just like for rehearsals and all these things. And so it was funny because they were like, "Oh, we're just tired of driving. You just go drive yourself." But it was interesting because like I was one of probably like the first people out of my friends to drive. So I was like, "Oh, I'll just go pick you up." So it like gave me an excuse to like, oh, I could leave now and just like come back whenever. Like it didn't matter. Like
Yo, that it's been really nice, like, being able to drive, like, that was, like, the moment I was like, "This is, like, I'm me," you know? Like, I can go meet with friends and that kind of thing, like, pick up all my friends, like, it's just been I love it.
and it's so nice because then you can just listen to the music that you want to listen to now. It's not.
I'm not having to listen to the Wiggles while driving, I'll take
Yeah,
it, that
yeah.
is a win, like
Yeah, what was really funny is like my sister, I don't even remember what we used to listen to, but because all I remember is that I got to a point like when I had my CD player and stuff, I just like put it in my headphones and I'm like I'm just going to play my own music in the car cuz I don't even remember what we played. But she's at a point now where like because we're all adults, like as long as the radio's on, she's fine. Like she kind of doesn't care. She doesn't do talk radio, but as long as like someone's playing some form of music. So I was in the car with my husband, my sister's in the back seat, and then he had the radio off. And so then it's so funny because she's like pointing at his like at his radio, right? And I'm like sitting there, I'm like, what the heck? And then she's like gesturing to it. So my husband's like, oh, like, Angela, did you want me to turn on the music? And she's like, oh, yeah. And then he turned it on, and I looked at her, I'm like, why are you so polite? Because obviously, like, with me and my parents, she's just, like, yelling
like,
the whole time.
come on, like, get with it.
It was so fascinating to watch her be so polite. I was like, wait, so you can be polite. You're just choosing to not.
No, my
Yeah.
sister, like, a lot of people think she's like, "Oh, she's so, like, sweet. Oh my gosh, so angelic. Like, she's just perfect." And I'm like, "Girl, do you if you even knew how she talks to me, you would not be saying that." Like,
Yeah.
what? Like, my sister, she called on her, computer, like, my profile picture on it is, like, a grandma, and she's like, "Oh, hey, grandma," and I'm like, "Thanks, Maddie, for the really big ego boost. I appreciate
Yeah.
no, like, I think that's, like, a lot of people, like, emphatize, I think is the right word, yeah. Like, people with special needs and, like, they have no personality. Well, meanwhile, like, this girl is calling me grandma and telling my mom she wants to move out. Like, she definitely has her little spunk.
And it's so interesting because even, like, when I think I'll do that too at a certain level where, like, not infantile, but you do change your tone a little bit to people. But it's interesting because it's like in my subconscious, I know that like once they pick up on that, I'm giving them the attention. Then then it's kind of like you've passed the first gate of the threshold, which then I will be myself. Versus like, oh, like you're treating me like this, so I'm just gonna be like whatever. Like I don't know if that makes sense. Where like I think there's like just a subconscious like you either connect or you don't, and that will change how they're interacting.
No, I think that's really true. Like, I no, I get what you're saying, like, there's a fine line between, like, making yourself accessible to other people and, like, understandable, and then, like, belittling, I think is, like, a big thing. 'Cause you can talk to a kiddo who might have something going on, and you just need to maybe slow down how you're talking, talk, like, in a higher pitch so it's more recognizable and hearable. But then there's a difference between, like, being like, "Oh my gosh, how are you? Hi, girlie. Hi,
Oh,
girlfriend. Hi, girlfriend." No, literally
yeah.
one time, me and Maddie were getting school pictures, and the camera lady, for some reason, thought Maddie was, like, 6, and she had a stuffed animal, like and she was like, "Hi, girlfriend. Hey, girlfriend. Hey, girlfriend." I was like, "If you don't stop talking, like, this is not gonna end well for you." And Maddie was just giggling it up. She's like, "This lady's berserk." Like, so that was just one whole can of worms.
Oh, that's so funny though. Like that's also I don't think I've ever like remembered a picture day where they had a stuffed animal. Like all the ones I remember is just like someone saying
It
there.
was super weird. I didn't like it, kinda creepy. I don't know why they brought that to a high school. Like, I don't it's kinda random.
Yeah. sock puppets in general, I feel like they can be like tastefully done, and other times I'm like, okay, you're just being very
Yeah,
strange.
like
You know,
this
like
feels
it's a
awkward now.
very yeah,
No,
yeah, it's
literally,
like a
I'm like,
very
oh,
fine line thing.
okay, that's interesting.
So like she obviously her intellect is there, and now it's just more about like her gaining the power to be able to externally process it to like communicate. So then like have you all talked about like how guardianship will work with her like now that you're like getting to a point where she's older where like that would matter?
Yeah, no, it's like guardianship is like my parents have her guardianship right now since she's 18. And they had to like go through that whole court process for that, and it was like a huge pain. But it's definitely a lot to think about. Like I turned 18 last week. And so now officially, if something happens to my parents, I get custody and like guardianship of Maddie, which is a lot. Like my like high school boyfriend, right? We were talking one day and it got brought up. I was like, oh, by the way, if something ever happens, I get my sister. And so, like, I've had to grow up a lot quicker, and I feel like most siblings who have someone in their life with special needs do, they just have to mature a lot quicker. And so I think that's pretty crazy to think about. Like, I'm 18 and thinking about how I'm going to work with Social Security and like do all this, even though I won't have to for a while, hopefully. It is still kind of crazy to think like 18, if something happens, I'm that person who has to be responsible for a whole another living being that's, like, very existential, like, I'm like, "Oh," I can't even pick out the matching socks, like, who put me in charge of this? And so that's definitely, like, a lot to think about, and so, yeah. But Maddie, she's, like, very communicative. She has a Toby device, which is, like, eye tracking, and she just got a new one that's like an iPad, and it's an iPad Pro, like, very fancy, and it tracks her eyes like crazy, and, like, so you can see, like, on YouTube videos where she's looking, which is so funny because, like, you could tell, like, we'll be watching, like, band videos, and she'll, like, be looking at one person, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I see your type, like, okay, I get it." And so that's, like, really funny, and so she, like, is able to communicate with us through that Toby device. When it's hard though, because you have to look at stuff for, like, 30 seconds or 15 seconds, I forgot how long, but you have to just stare at it, and, like, if you move your eyes at all, like, it won't say it. So it's, like, tough to do, like
That's a long
no, and I
time.
have, like, ADD, so I would not be able to do that. I would be, like, so scatterbrained, I wouldn't be able to say anything.
Oh, that's it. I didn't realize that was that long of a threshold. Like I had seen things that were like that. I mean, and when I've seen them like on like not in person. I've just seen like videos or like people using them and stuff. But that it's interesting because she's at a capacity where she can communicate pretty well. Like yeah, even if it's like a 15-second thing or whatever, you probably can get like a pretty good idea just because she is at a level where she can figure out a way to tell you like what she needs or what she wants.
Yeah, no, it's definitely and, like, we have our own, like, things. She'll look away for no and look at you for yes. Like, just little things like that, like,
Oh,
other people
okay.
won't pick up on it, but we know, like, "Hey, Maddie, do you want the purple one? No, okay. Do you want this pink one? Yes," like, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. So like, within your family, it's like
Mhm.
fast, like
Yep.
because at least you can get like either like yes or no questions. You can probably get to
Oh,
like
yeah,
a
and so that's a lot quicker than, like, her having to wait 15 seconds just staring at something, and then having to go to a different word and, like, make these complete sentences. And she's learning, like oh my gosh, so she's 20, and she thinks because of that, she should be able to curse at school. We're like, "Maddie, you cannot say
ah!
those words." But we told her if she can spell them, because there's, like, a keyboard, if you could spell them, you could say them, and she's been working on it, like, every day during speech therapy, and which is actually so funny because she gets, like, pediatric therapy still, and so the speech therapist will be like, "Oh, what are you spelling? What is that?" And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, oh
Oh
no."
no!
Like, this girl's used to playing with, like, toddlers. This is gonna be a 360. Like, I feel so bad.
That's
But
so funny
yeah,
though.
no,
Like that's so yeah.
Maddie's saying she
That's
loves saying pickup lines to people and seeing how they react. Especially, like, she'll say them to her doctors too, and so we'll be, like, at a doctor appointment, she'll be like, "Hey," and, like, say a pickup line. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." It's actually so funny. They eat it up too. They adore it. Every time Maddie comes up, they're like, "What's my joke for today?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh,
yeah,
you're getting way
yeah.
too into this."
Well, it's just funny because yeah, the first couple of times you like want to die of embarrassment because also you don't know, especially when like you tell it to someone who like you don't know them. Because obviously, like when you're friends, like no one, everyone's like fine. But yeah, it's like the first time you're like, oh no, like it's either gonna go fine or it's gonna be like I'm gonna kill myself.
No, they're gonna be like, "Oh, that's interesting. Okay," because 'cause they're not gonna say anything bad, be like, "That was inappropriate." They're just gonna be like, "Oh." okay, that's cool. Like, it's gonna be so awkward. But, thankfully, all of her pickup lines and jokes have gone over well.
That's so funny. But yeah, I could like there's a tension in like you don't know if it's
You know, with
gonna
strangers, I'm like, "Ooh," like, "Oh,
yeah, no,
no."
exactly. Yeah, my sister's sense of humor is much more like it comes out much more like after she knows you versus like if like complete strangers. But like yeah, once you hit like a certain point with her, then like her humor will come
Oh,
out a
yeah.
lot more. Yeah.
Me and Maggie are so extroverted, we're just like, "Hey, random stranger, wanna hear this pickup line?"
Yeah, but that works out because well, I mean, it's nice because then you both have that in common too, so it helps just like connect you both, and then like it's not as detrimental, not detrimental, it's not as like terrifying. I'll use that as. It's been interesting because like both me and my sister after we moved out from where because we all grew up together, like we lived with my parents, and then until I got married, and then but then she moved out like the fall of 2021. So it's interesting because after we've both moved out, we are much more similar in like demeanor, personality, and things like that. But it's interesting because like growing up, I think she was more consistently like what she is now, but I wasn't. So like I probably changed more than she did. But that being said, like we're very much like in alignment with like humor and like stuff like that. But that's very different than like my parents' sense of humor and like
Oh,
demeanor
yeah.
and stuff.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, they're like very polar opposites. So it's really fascinating to like think about things that we would do when we were little and how that went over versus like now when we're like on like video calls and it's like very different than
You're like,
before.
"Wow, oh, what a 360 there."
So that part is fun. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that was of interest or like questions or
What's really interesting is, like, the amount of siblings I've talked to that have decided to go into the healthcare field is actually kinda crazy. Like, because I think because 'cause we're around it and, like, low-key desensitized to it our entire lives, we're like, "Oh, whatever this is, I've already seen this. I know what this is. No worries here." Like, stuff like that. So, I'm actually, like, now I'm in an EMT class, and I'm, like, learning about, like, all this stuff, and a lot of stuff it's really cool. It's like a full circle moment. Like, we're talking about, like, guardianship, and I'm like, "Oh, I already know what that is. I got this." And, like, medical powers of attorneys, I'm like, "Oh, I know this stuff." So it's really cool to see, like, how this is and, like, being around this, like, household and environment hasn't just helped me, like, develop, like, as a person and, like, get the traits I've gotten from it, but, like, it's helping me career-wise too, which I didn't think would ever happen, and, like, I'm able to talk to patients a lot better than some of, the other people I'm around because I'm used to, like, talking to people more in that kinda setting, and so that's been, like, a really cool bonus, I guess, and, like, the compassion's there too, which just really helps. It's like a 360 like, a full, like, circle moment. That's been fun.
I would say like a very large percentage of siblings I have talked to on this podcast are in some form of discipline related to their siblings' disability. So like there's a lot of like OT, um there's a lot of like behavioral therapists. There's like yeah, there's a variety, but yeah, I would have to look at a list to see if it was like actually like how high of a percentage it is, but almost everyone is doing something that's related. Even if it's not like in a health or science field, it's still like tangentially related to like teaching
There's
or
a correlation.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting how like it's yeah, there's such a strong correlation and obviously there's people who they don't do anything that's correlated. That's totally fine. Like that they're just it's just a typical thing, but it's just it is interesting like statistically how many like how that works out, especially like when you look at younger siblings, older siblings, and like yourself in the middle, right? Like, that's why I always think it's interesting for me to like meet other people who are like in different birth orders, just because like there's stuff that we have in common, but there's stuff that we don't, and it's so fascinating, right? Because like from a guardianship standpoint, like if you were older than Maddie, like that, like your brain would be wired differently in that capacity than mine, but because it's not like you're not only like wrapping your head around it as in general, but you're wrapping it around as someone who's younger than her.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting playing that, like, older sibling, young like, middle child role. Like, I'm both, but, like, it's interesting how I go in between.
Because you technically are an older sister to your brother. Yeah, so that's why it's
And
like.
then, like, sometimes, like, I don't it's just a whole thing, but, we figured out. Me and Maddie were the same size, so we get share clothes, so no complaints here. It works out.
There you go, yeah. Yeah, it's always fun to like just how it will impact like your vocational career. And it'll be really interesting like for you after you start working and how then that also transcends itself too, right? Cuz it's like sometimes which is just like a regular becoming an adult thing. Like that's not a like special needs sibling thing. But I think it is interesting how it's almost like depending on the strength of your connection to it and it mattering to you dictates kind of like how far in the hole you kind of go in that field versus it just being like
No,
yeah
I completely
yeah
get what you're saying, for sure. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know why I thought about that, probably because I had an EMT test this morning, so it was, like, just like, "Oh, yeah."
that would be very related but that works like that's why I just say it's open forum like whoever whatever we talk about it's like because everyone always has something different right and that's what's so fascinating too it's like it doesn't matter like age, birth order, location, like everyone has something to say.
Yeah, oh, look at that. Put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, we should, yeah.
I can see it now, merch. We matter. Just leave it at that. And people are like, "What?"
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you wearing
Conversation
that?
starter. Yeah, exactly. Those are like always the best posters and stuff. You're like, I don't get it. And then you're like, well, here's the whole spiel.
Well, actually, now that you ask.
Yeah, yeah exactly. I guess with that, what are your words of encouragement for other siblings listening?
I'd say that it always gets better. Like, even when Maddie was having, like, really prolonged hospital stays and, like, I was home, like, watching my younger brother, like, I didn't really, like, have a life or that kind of thing, like, it always gets better, I feel like. And, like, the longer you're in it, the more you realize, like, it is such a blessing. I do have a sibling with special needs. I really don't think I would be the person I am. Like, I know everyone says it, like, without my sister. The lessons I learned from her, like, you can't get from just, like, going to school or that kind of thing. So that's been really special, but I would say, like, make sure you have your own identity outside of being, like, a special needs sibling, because sometimes it's really hard and you'll kind of pigeonhole yourself and be like, "Oh, yeah, like, well, you'll figure out a way to, like, include it in every conversation or, like, figure out ways to, like, make opportunities for your sister when it's, like, supposed to be about you." And so I'd say it's really important to have your own, sense of identity and, like, know what you like to do, even if you don't always get to do it, just having that sense of, like, where can I go to, like, relax? Do I like to play sports? Like, that kind of thing is so important, and I think it just really helps, especially when you're older, like, I'm looking at colleges, and now that I know, like, who I am outside of just being a sibling, it's really important to, like, see, like, what I'm looking for, I guess is a good way of putting it.
It's very helpful in that process.
Yeah. So, like, having a life outside of just your family and then, it always gets better. And so, like, try to stay positive even though sometimes it really sucks and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, why can't I just be in that typical American 2.5 kids, white picket fence, no issues." Yeah, like, house, but I think everything I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason. And so I think that's just really important to remember that, like, right now it sucks, but give it 2 months and, like, you'll see where it ends up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was such a hoot and a half. I just love chit-chatting.
Yes.
So it works out.
Perfect. Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.